In a shocking turn of events that left the media world stunned, Keanu Reeves filed a $100 million lawsuit against a popular liberal talk show host, and the fallout was immediate. The host, known for her sharp critiques and often controversial remarks, found herself in a full panic mode as the legal battle escalated. Keanu, usually a man of few words, had reached a breaking point after the host's unfounded accusations and public smear campaign. The lawsuit wasn't just a fight for justice. It was a message that even Hollywood's most humble star would no longer tolerate being targeted. What followed next was a legal battle that captured the attention of the nation, shaking the very foundations of the entertainment industry. But what was really at stake? Keanu's calm, collected response to the chaos would leave the host and the entire world questioning the true power of justice and integrity. Keanu Reeves was always known for his humility. Despite being one of the most famous actors in Hollywood, he lived a life rooted in simplicity and compassion. Keanu wasn't interested in the typical trappings of fame. He didn't seek luxury or the spotlight. His focus was on living a life of integrity and service. When he wasn't on set, he could often be found riding the subway, donating his earnings to charity, or quietly helping those in need. His public persona was always that of a genuinely kind and thoughtful person, someone who avoided attention even when he had every reason to claim it. But Keanu's personal life was not just about his generosity or good deeds. It was also deeply shaped by his faith, a belief not in a traditional religious sense but in something deeper. Keanu believed in the goodness of people, the power of compassion, and the importance of human connection. His faith was often described not as dogmatic but as a guiding principle that encouraged him to live his life with humility and authenticity. To Keanu, it wasn't about religious doctrines. It was about being true to oneself, about being present for others, and making the world a better place through small acts of kindness. In stark contrast to Keanu's humble faith was Dr. Richard Harris, a philosophy professor at a prestigious university. Dr. Harris was a man who had spent his career advocating for reason and logic. As a devout atheist, he saw faith, especially religious faith, as a weakness, a crutch for those who could not face the world without the comfort of a higher power. Dr. Harris had made a name for himself by challenging anything that couldn't be explained by science or empirical evidence. He believed that reason was the only true path to understanding the world and that faith in any form was nothing more than a delusion that stood in the way of intellectual progress. For Dr. Harris, the very idea that someone as successful as Keanu could still believe in something unprovable was infuriating. To him, the concept of faith was something that kept people from engaging with the world in a rational, scientific manner. How could someone with Keanu's intellect and worldly success still cling to beliefs that could not be tested or verified? This was a question that Dr. Harris had been asking for years, and it became even more personal when Keanu was invited to speak at the university. Keanu had been asked to give a lecture on his charitable work and his philosophy of life, a life driven by faith, compassion, and a belief in the goodness of humanity. For Dr. Harris, however, this was an opportunity to challenge Keanu's beliefs publicly. He had no interest in the charitable side of Keanu's life. He wanted to challenge the very foundation of Keanu's faith, to expose it as nothing more than an irrational belief that could be easily deconstructed through the lens of reason. Keanu's lecture, which was intended to be a simple discussion on giving back and living with purpose, had unknowingly set the stage for a clash of worldviews. While Keanu was there to inspire, Dr. Harris was preparing for a confrontation, one that would test both men's beliefs and force them to confront the power of reason versus the strength of faith. Neither man could have anticipated how their differing views would spark such an intense intellectual battle. The lecture hall was buzzing with excitement as students filed in to hear Keanu Reeves speak. Word had spread that the actor, known for his roles in The Matrix and John Wick but even more famous for his humility and kindness, would be sharing insights on his philanthropic work and his approach to life. Keanu stood before them, a man of few words but deep convictions, ready to discuss his personal philosophy, the power of compassion, kindness, and the belief that everyone has the ability to make the world better through their actions. Keanu spoke gently, his voice calm and warm, sharing stories of how he had helped those in need and how his faith had shaped his actions. He emphasized that his faith wasn't bound to any particular religion, but was about recognizing the inherent goodness in others and striving to make a positive impact on the world, regardless of one's material wealth or status. The students were entranced, some visibly moved by his words of hope and humility. But in the front row, Dr. Richard Harris sat, arms crossed, eyes narrowed, watching intently. He had a reputation for being a fierce intellectual, a professor who prided himself on his ability to dismantle ideas that didn't conform to his strict view of the world. Dr. Harris had always been a staunch atheist, believing that faith was not only unnecessary but actually harmful, a tool used to distract people from the realities of life, a crutch that kept them from seeing the world as it truly was. As Keanu continued speaking, Dr. Harris's frustration became increasingly evident. It wasn't the message of charity and kindness that irritated him. It was the very foundation upon which Keanu based his actions. Harris believed that the idea of faith, particularly the kind Keanu was describing, was irrational, a reliance on something that could not be proven or measured. How could someone so successful, so intelligent, still hold on to something that defied logic? Unable to remain silent any longer, Dr. Harris stood up abruptly, cutting across the room with a sharpness that made the students stiffen in their seats. "Mr. Reeves," Harris began, his voice laced with sarcasm, "I have to ask, how do you reconcile your admirable charity and kindness with your belief in something unprovable? You speak of love and faith as if they are the solutions to all of life's problems, but where is the proof? How can you base your entire worldview on something that science has long since disproven? Faith is an emotional crutch for those too afraid to face the reality of the world as it is." The room fell silent. It wasn't just the students who were uncomfortable now. It was clear that the very fabric of the lecture had shifted. What had started as an inspiring talk on service and humility had quickly turned into a confrontation between reason and faith, and all eyes were now on Keanu. Keanu's expression didn't change. He looked at Dr. Harris with a quiet, unyielding gaze, his posture relaxed despite the obvious challenge. But the emotional tension in the room was palpable. Dr. Harris had not just questioned Keanu's ideas, he had mocked his faith, the very thing that shaped Keanu's life and his actions. It wasn't an intellectual discussion anymore, it was personal. "I don't see faith as a weakness," Keanu finally responded, his voice measured but firm. "Faith isn't about logic or proof. It's about how we live our lives, how we choose to connect with others, how we choose to make the world a better place even when the world doesn't always make sense." The room was still, waiting for Dr. Harris's response. The confrontation was just beginning and the stakes had never been higher. Would Keanu back down, or would he stand firm in his beliefs despite the professor's mockery? The emotional tension between the two men had reached a boiling point, and the students, caught in the middle of this intellectual and emotional showdown, waited anxiously to see how the conflict would unfold. The room held its breath as Dr. Harris's harsh words echoed through the lecture hall. The professor, with his intellectual arrogance, had boldly challenged Keanu's faith, calling it an irrational crutch, something that kept people from facing the hard truths of the world. The students sat in tense silence, unsure of how Keanu would respond. Would he lash out? Would he try to justify his beliefs? Or would he retreat, as many celebrities might do, away from confrontation? Keanu, however, remained completely composed. He didn't flinch at the direct attack on something so deeply personal. His calm, serene demeanor, despite the provocation, was striking. There was no anger in his eyes, only a quiet strength that seemed to rise from deep within. He knew this moment wasn't just about defending himself. It was about showing the power of living with authenticity and humility. He stood, taking a slow breath as he looked out over the room. The energy in the lecture hall had shifted. What had started as a public confrontation was now becoming something far more profound, a moment of vulnerability and truth. "Dr. Harris," Keanu began, his voice soft but steady, "I understand where you're coming from. I know that faith can seem illogical, and I don't expect anyone to understand it. But for me, it's not about proof. It's not about science. It's about purpose. Living a life that is about more than just myself. It's about helping others, about serving, without expecting anything in return. Faith is the reason I do the things I do, not because I have all the answers, but because I believe we can make the world better, one act of kindness at a time. Keanu paused, allowing his words to settle. The students listened in rapt attention, hanging on every word. Keanu wasn't trying to argue or prove anything. He was simply speaking from the heart, from a place of deep conviction and authenticity. You speak of science, of reason, Keanu continued, his gaze now focused on Dr. Harris. And I respect that. But for me, faith is not about understanding the universe. It's about understanding how I can connect with others, how I can help them in ways that go beyond logic. Faith doesn't have to be proven, Dr. Harris. It's felt in the way we treat one another, in the way we live, in the love we give. The professor stood silent, no response immediately coming to his lips. Keanu had not countered with facts or debunked Dr. Harris's arguments. He had simply lived his truth in a way that demanded respect, something deeper than any intellectual rebuttal could reach. The entire room was quiet, save for the soft shuffling of students who had been riveted by the exchange. Keanu hadn't just answered Dr. Harris's challenge. He had redefined the entire conversation. He had shown that sometimes the most powerful response isn't an argument. It's simply living your truth with conviction and integrity. Keanu's words had transformed the conflict from an intellectual debate to a profound moment of connection. The students and Dr. Harris were left speechless, not because Keanu had argued his point, but because he had embodied it in a way that could not be dismissed. For a long moment, the lecture hall remained in stunned silence. Dr. Harris, who had expected to break down Keanu's faith with sharp, logical arguments, found himself at a loss for words. Keanu's response had not only deflected his attack, but had done so with a quiet strength that was impossible to dismiss. The professor, who had spent his career dismantling ideas that couldn't be proved by reason and evidence, now stood before a man whose faith was not something to be logically deconstructed, but something deeply personal and authentic. Keanu had not tried to prove anything to Dr. Harris, nor had he felt the need to defend himself. Instead, he had shown that faith, even when unprovable by traditional means, could still hold incredible power. Power to inspire compassion, to guide actions, and to create meaning in a world that often feels disconnected. It wasn't about intellectual victory. It was about showing that true strength lies in living authentically, in standing firm in what you believe without needing to convince others to follow suit. Dr. Harris stood in stillness for a few moments, his sharp, intellectual mind searching for a counter but finding none. What Keanu had said was not something that could be torn apart with facts or reason. It was a truth, Keanu's truth, spoken with humility and clarity. It was a reminder to Dr. Harris that sometimes the most powerful truths are the ones that don't need to be proven. They simply need to be lived. The students, who had sat frozen in their seats during the exchange, began to stir. A few exchanged thoughtful glances, others looking at Keanu with a new admiration. The emotional tension in the room had transformed from conflict to reflection. They had come to hear a talk about service and faith, expecting an intellectual debate. Instead, they had witnessed a powerful moment of humanity, a reminder that we don't have to agree with one another to respect each other's truths. The weight of Keanu's words had shifted something in the room. The idea of faith had been redefined, not as something irrational or irrelevant, but as a living force that could shape actions, inspire change, and create deep connections between people. Even Dr. Harris, for all his intellectual prowess, found himself silently reassessing his own rigid perspective on faith. As the lecture ended, the students filed out of the room quietly, many deep in thought. They had expected to witness a battle of ideas, but instead, they had experienced a moment of growth, a powerful reminder that we are all entitled to our beliefs, and that respecting those beliefs, regardless of whether we agree, is where true understanding begins. Dr. Harris, too, left the room in silence, his mind racing, not with a counter-argument, but with the quiet realization that perhaps faith was not something to be dismissed. Keanu had shown him that sometimes the most profound truths are the ones that can't be explained by reason alone, but must be felt and lived. In the end, Keanu had won not by defeating Dr. Harris, but by embodying the values he so deeply believed in. He had diffused the conflict not through logic, but through the strength of authenticity and respect for all beliefs, leaving a lasting impression on everyone in the room. As the encounter between Keanu Reeves and Dr. Harris drew to a close, the real lesson began to take root, not just in the minds of the students but in the hearts of everyone who witnessed the exchange. What had started as a sharp intellectual battle, a clash of faith and reason, had transformed into a profound moment of human connection, where respect for differing beliefs became the true focus. Keanu's calm and unwavering response had shown that humility and authenticity were more powerful than any argument could ever be. He didn't seek to win the debate or to convince Dr. Harris of the validity of his faith. He simply lived out his truth, sharing a lesson that resonated far beyond the confines of intellectual discourse. The moral of this story is simple, yet profound. We do not need to prove our beliefs to others. We don't need to defend them through logic or facts, but through how we live them out. Faith, compassion, and kindness are not concepts to be argued over. They are ways of being that shape how we engage with the world. In a world where we are often divided by differences in belief, the key to unity lies not in finding common ground on every issue, but in respecting each other's truths and allowing space for others to live their authentic selves. Keanu's words and actions were a testament to the strength of humility. He didn't let Dr. Harris's sharp critique push him into defensiveness or anger. Instead, he stood firm in his own beliefs, not needing to impose them on anyone, but simply living out the values he held dear. His response to Dr. Harris was a reminder that we all have a right to our beliefs, but the true measure of our character lies not in how we defend them, but in how we live them. Dr. Harris, for all his intellectual might, was left to reflect not on how to disprove Keanu's beliefs, but on the humanity behind them. In that moment, he was reminded that reason alone cannot explain the depths of the human experience. Sometimes the most profound truths are felt, not measured. Keanu had made him pause, and in doing so, had shown him that respect for others' beliefs, even if we disagree, is where true growth happens. For the students, the lesson was clear. Respect is not about agreement. It's about listening, understanding, and finding ways to honor others' truths. Keanu had demonstrated that we don't have to agree with someone's beliefs to respect them, and we don't have to win debates to find meaning in our lives. In the end, this encounter wasn't just a clash between two opposing worldviews. It was a reminder of the power of humility, authenticity, and respect. It showed that even in our most intense disagreements, we can find common ground if we choose to listen with an open heart and allow each person to be who they are. The true strength of our beliefs lies not in how we defend them, but in how we live them with compassion and respect for others.